Hey Shasta County, this is Matt Plummer. I'm here with Mercedes Patee, and we are going to be talking about opioids and fentanyl as part of a broader series that I want to do to bring insight to this topic. We've been talking about it as a community for a few weeks in light of the $39 million in opioid settlement funds that the county is receiving. So I wanted to just bring a few different voices and different expertise and personal stories, as you'll see in some of the other conversations, to you so that we can all get up to speed on what this is like, how do we best address this. So Mercedes has a really interesting kind of experience working with this. So I'd love to just, what was your involvement? How did you get connected to opioid related work?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So I started first in the emergency department. I'm an emergency physician, and I was working here at the local hospital. And we would see a lot of people come in either addiction related stuff, or for other issues, they would come in that also had addiction issues, right? And so in the emergency department, that can really take a lot of your energy, because you're not only dealing with the medical issue, but you're also dealing with the behaviors that come with addiction, and obviously the withdrawal and all those other things. And so I could say that just about every shift I had someone who had some sort of addiction that was somehow that we had to adjust, or we had to make decisions in our regular visit that because of that addiction. And so that's where it started.
Okay.
But since then, we have opened up an outpatient practice for the treatment of drugs and alcohol, using medications to reduce cravings and counseling. But I think that's where it started with me.
Yeah, we hear that all the time, that our emergency rooms have basically become a holding center for people either with mental illness or people with addiction, and that is disrupting the normal flow of people who have a physically medical situation to deal with. Now, so you've had a number of years of experience kind of working with populations that are affected by this. What I thought was really interesting in some of our previous conversations was the way you got into some of the neuroscience, which I know can be a little heady, but it's actually, I think, really helpful to understand.
Yes.
Is how does, say, when someone is taking fentanyl, what does that actually do to them? What does that do to the brain?
Right, yeah, so that's a great question. And what it does to the brain, really you see it in what it does to the behavior. So can I talk about the behavior a little bit and then go back on the brain? So with the behavior, someone who is on fentanyl, it changes, first of all, their perspective of everything. So things that would be good decisions, your ability to make a good decision that is good for your health, good for your family, good for long-term goals, all that goes away. And the reason that goes away is because the brain is in this survival mode. And I'll explain a little bit more about survival mode, but in the emergency department, you'll have somebody come in who needs admission. Let's say they have some sort of infection from IV drug use, or let's say they just had an overdose and they really need help, or it was an alcohol related thing and their liver enzymes are super high and they're just really sick. You want to treat them. You want them to be better, but they'll run out. The nurse will come over and say, the patient's gone.
Wow.
And they knew, you had already told them, if you don't stop using, you're going to die. Like, I remember I had a patient that was missing almost like half of their upper, like part of the chest and their arm, because of infection that had eaten it all up. And that person came in with another infection. And I said, we need to take care of this right now. And initially they're willing because they're not withdrawing. But as soon as 30 minutes pass or half an hour pass, or the internist comes to admit them, they do the paperwork, and next thing you know, they're gone.
Wow.
And they are afraid to die. These people are afraid to die, but the problem is they feel like they're dying, right? So what happens in the brain?
They feel like they're dying because of the withdrawal.
Because of the withdrawal.
Okay.
Or the fear of the withdrawal. They know that if they don't get their substance, they're going to be, in their mind, dying, right? So what happens in the brain? Well, it comes down to this chemical called dopamine, right? Dopamine is something that we need to survive. Everyone has dopamine. Everyone has a certain level of dopamine that is very healthy. And maybe this is where I'll also talk about the difference between dependence and addiction.
Okay.
So dependence is actually healthy, right? We all have a dependence on something. A normal, healthy body has a dependence. For example, we are dependent on insulin. We are dependent on the different hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, thyroid hormone, growth hormone. We are dependent on all these things. That is healthy. That is normal. Dependence is not abnormal. Okay. We are dependent on dopamine. And dopamine does so many different things. But if you could say, what is the main thing dopamine does? It's motivation. So dopamine is what gets you out of bed, to get your kids ready to go to school, to go to work on time, to pay your bills, to cook, to be able to have fun with your family, to be able to handle any stress that comes, right? Any stress, like I can't find my shoes, to, now we have a major bill, how are we going to pay for it, right? Dopamine is the motivation hormone that allows you to do all this. When your dopamine level is low, you feel very sick. It's almost like being in this flu type state, okay? Physically and mentally, right? So what happens is that we have a normal level of dopamine. So just going back, and I was looking at the research and the numbers, and you don't test this on the lab and whatnot, but in research they test this. And a normal dopamine level is about 50 nanograms per deciliter. Okay. The most
in the blood, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yes, in the blood. Yeah. So the most you'll ever have, the greatest day of your life. You've won the lottery. You've got your body fitness the way that you want it. You're out in an all-inclusive resort, and this is all happening in one day. The most you'll ever have, it'll go up to 100 nanograms per deciliter, right? When you're feeling sick, you have the flu, you're just low energy, you don't feel well, you're laying in bed, you can't even get up to take a shower, you're probably at 40. Okay, so that's the normal
40
range.
to 100.
Yeah, that's where you're at. But every day it's about 50. So what happens when you use, let's say, some substance? I'm going to say methamphetamine now, knowing that fentanyl is much stronger. I don't have the actual data right now as far as like how high fentanyl gets you, but it's a lot higher. So let's say a methamphetamine, you use that. You'll go up to over 1,000. Over 1,000 in one moment. You'll go up to over 1,000. And imagine you've never experienced all this joy and excitement and elation. It's greater than winning the lottery.
Wow.
You feel incredible, and you'll go up there when you use, right? And so this is what like draws people to it. But over time, the first time you use it goes up, and the second time it's not as high, and the third time is not as high. And then finally, you're using just to get to your baseline, 50, just so it won't go down, because your body adjusts to it. Right? So now you get someone in withdrawal. Not only do they have low levels, but they have a significant quick drop, which is the drop is awful. The drop is the worst. That's the withdrawal. And then the long-term effect is the constant low. So your body quits producing as much dopamine on its own. And so now you're not only having a drop, but you're going to drop at a level that is around 10.
Oh, wow.
And you're going to be there for years. Your life's never going to be that great.
And so going back to the emergency room story that you told, that is the experience that they're trying to avoid, is that drop to 10 where they feel like their whole life is crashing down.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And the awful, and that's when you talk about that's motivation, but everything else that comes with it, you get significant pain. You get this physical pain. Okay. You get this depression that comes over you, like a suicidal depression with panic and anxiety, right? That comes over you. You get vomiting. That the only way you're going to control that vomiting is to use. Stomach cramps. Imagine having, some of those viruses that go out there really give you these intense abdominal cramps, stomach cramps, diarrhea, right? You put that all together into this dark place in your life, and you're going to be like that for days.
And how long after someone stops using would that trigger? Yeah,
so the withdrawal symptoms depends on how long they've been using, how often they've been using, and what dose. So, but currently with fentanyl, people will go up for 2 weeks on this, just sick for 2 weeks. And then after the 2 weeks, their dopamine is down at 10. Okay. And that goes on for years.
And that's where the second part of the cravings, starts,
the
which
craving is constant.
why actually staying free from it is so difficult.
It's so difficult. There's such a low long-term success rate. And I believe, I don't know this for sure, but I believe that those who do have long-term success, probably it's those people who have used less amounts or maybe just pills or not for as long of a time, so their body hasn't fully dropped the dopamine that low.
Okay.
So I think that's, but yeah, long-term success rate is incredibly low because your body will never not need dopamine. It will never not need dopamine. You always have to get it to a healthy level, and you will always crave, and you'll always be fighting your body until that it's at the right level.
And is that, so with fentanyl, and I know you were just giving the example of methamphetamine, but with fentanyl, it's even more powerful.
Yes.
Does someone have to take that for years to have this happen? Or is it, one or two times or somewhere in between? What are we talking about in terms of what creates this impact on someone's brain chemistry?
Yeah, so it's even within, like we will have some people that go in for surgery or have this injury and are on opioids on a daily basis until they recover. And, they would be in a couple of weeks, or I should say a month. And then when they stop, they'll start getting withdrawal. So you can easily, your body will very quickly adjust and the withdrawal symptoms will be real, even within that short period of time. That doesn't mean they have an addiction or they haven't had a behavior of addiction, but that means that their body, their biochemistry has already changed, that they will go into withdrawal even with a few weeks of constant opioids. And those are pills.
Right, those are not intended to get you as high as the street drugs that you're using. Yeah. So then the antidote to this, to help address this and actually help people get there, I mean, you hear people say, well, can they just stop using go cold turkey? For fentanyl in particular, is that an option?
You can. People have done it. And some people have, been able to be abstinent for a while, but the rate of those who remain abstinent is super low. I mean, they do it in jail all the time, right? Yeah. In prison, people will go in, they just don't, not that you can't get access, but they won't, they'll withdraw, and they're in there for, a couple of years, or at prison, they're in a couple of years, and they said, I will never use again, I would never use again. And as soon as they're released, within 30 minutes, they got their next dose. Why is it? Because you haven't addressed the issue that their biochemistry is sick. They have low dopamine levels, and they will forever, well, I shouldn't say forever, but for a long term crave dopamine, right?
So even if you go a number of years without using, and then if you have that opportunity to use again, that craving is still going to be there.
It's so intense, yeah, because you're sick. Your body needs it. You have to have it. You need a normal dopamine level to function. Right? And then those people that have been absent, it's been 8 months and I haven't used, like, are they up and how are they doing in recovery? Are they up getting a job? Are they, getting their kids to school? Are they living their life as someone who has recovered, or are they just on survival? Are they just trying to say no? Right? And so I think a lot of people, as long as you have, like, you can sustain it. There are places where you go for recovery that don't use any medications and everything is controlled, and you have a support group of people and they're feeding into you and you're doing well, and you can sustain off that. I do believe that there's so much to that you can sustain off, but medically you have to realize that this is not just addiction habit. There is a true healthy dependency that now their body cannot meet. So when someone, for example, quits producing insulin, right?
Right. It's kind of like type 2 diabetes, I would imagine.
Yeah, like almost like or let's just to make it like a more pure example, like type 1, like your pancreas quits working, right?
Right.
And so it's not that just resistant to it, but they just don't even produce it at all, right? Well, do you tell them, well, don't eat anything that needs to be broken down by insulin? You don't do that. What you do is you replace insulin to get them to live a healthy lifestyle, right? And so you want them to live a healthy lifestyle. You want them to be able to do all the activities that they could do in their life and that they're expected to do. Kids to go to play sports and to be able to, you still eat healthfully, but you want them to live a life. And so when you want people who have been in addiction to go into recovery, you actually want them to recover life. You want them to have kids. You want them to have a house and a job, and you have to be able to handle stressors and all these things.
Right.
So you need to be able to get them on level playing ground, as all of us are, with our dopamine levels, so that we have the ability to do that.
And so that's where and if you've been following along with this conversation, you probably have at this point heard the terms medical detox and also medically assisted treatment, or MAT. So can you talk to us a little bit about how each of those, which are distinct steps in the process, but how each of those help address this problem, which, just to summarize here, what Mercedes has basically described is that your dopamine levels, which reward you and motivate you to do the things that everybody are pro-social good activities, go down, and then when you come off of it, those don't get replaced, and so you're in this constant state of depression, craving, etc. And so medical detox, medically assisted treatment, those are meant to help address the changes that have happened as a result of the drugs in your biochemistry.
Yes.
How does that work?
Yeah, so exactly. So medical detox is talking about those first few days off, right? Because you're not just, the issue is not just the fact that you have now chronic low levels. The issue is that you go through these days where you're vomiting, you're having the cramping, the intense pain, the anxiety. So medical detox is what helps people who want to be in recovery actually go through those days to enter medically assisted treatment, right?
Okay.
So that would include where you're getting medical care, you're getting IV fluids, you're getting nausea medication, you're getting cramping medication, diarrhea medication, anxiety medication, even the blood pressure goes up and the heart rate and all. You're getting medication to control that, so that you're not suffering so much that you're like, I can't do this.
And that's the point from, if we think about it from a societal perspective, we want to make it easier for these people to detox and get off of these things. And so that is what you're saying, is it helps treat the symptoms of that as well as addressing some of the brain chemistry, but that really is going to come later.
Right. Yeah. So once you get them off, so there's two main opioids that are used for MAT services, so medication assisted treatment. And MAT, what it is giving you a medication that brings your dopamine levels to the correct level. Okay, so that's what MAT does. And so the main one is buprenorphine and methadone. Right? They work kind of differently, but I'm just going to clump it together right now. So in order to start, let's say buprenorphine, you actually have to be off fentanyl for several days, because otherwise the buprenorphine will cause you to go into withdrawal. But when you're in withdrawal, it takes away withdrawal symptoms. And that's all has to do with the drop, how quickly dopamine is dropping. That's what that has to do with.
Okay.
But once you've come off of fentanyl and your fentanyl is out of your system and your dopamine has come down from that high level or whatever it was and is gone, then buprenorphine comes in and brings you up to that healthy level like everybody else, the dopamine level. To get to there in those days is where you do the medical detox to get you there.
Okay, got it. And the idea then is that, the MAT treatment would help you, one, not feel so miserable that you want to go self-medicate.
Right.
And two, to help you feel, okay, I feel good about life. I don't have these cravings to return to this.
Right.
And so in terms of MAT, is that, and you've kind of alluded to this previously, but is that something that you have to do for a week? Is that something you have to do for a few years? How do you think about that treatment duration? Right.
So you do medication assisted treatment as long as they need it. Right. And so you don't know, everybody's body is a little different, and depending on how long they used. And so some people will never produce their normal dopamine levels, just thinking medically, because they've just been using fentanyl for high doses frequency, for so long. And so you give them the medication as long as they need it. And the way you know they need it is by cravings.
Okay.
Right? So you because cravings equal low dopamine. That is the symptom. You don't do a lab test or an x-ray or a study. It's all symptom based. And that's how you know you're at the right level. So what I do with my patients, for example, is I tell them, I will never ask you to cut down on your buprenorphine. But when you want to try it out and feel like you can go down or you start forgetting to take it, that might be a sign that your body's already healing. So we have successfully had people completely come off of buprenorphine after a few years of treatment.
Okay.
And their body has healed. We have some people that will say, Doc, I'm good. I'm good where I'm at. I'm doing well. Let me not change it. I don't want to bring on anxiety that's unnecessary for them, right? So if they're good at the level they're at, they are back to school, or they have their jobs, they're getting their kids to school, they're cleaning their house, they're having great time with their family. It's working. They're recovering their life.
Yeah.
Let's keep treating it and let's keep supporting them in it.
Yeah, I know that, and that makes sense. I mean, I think that's something for us as a community to recognize is we're not talking about a quick, 2-week process, and we're going to take people who have, in some cases been on fentanyl for months or years and, think that we can have them back in a stable situation. This is an extended journey that we have to go along with them.
It can be lifelong.
Yeah.
It can be lifelong. I would like to kind of pose a study that was done to help people understand, because all of this can be up here in your head and we need to get it over here, So there was a study that was done a few years back that was comparing cravings between 3 groups of people. So one of them were a group of people that had not drank any water for 3 days. Okay. The other was a group that had not eaten any food for 5 days. They were getting vitamin supplements and IV fluids so they won't be sick.
Okay.
And then a group that had been abstinent from opioids for multiple time frames. So it could have been recent, could have been years.
They tested a few different time frames.
Yeah, different time frames. Okay. And so what they did for the first group with the people that couldn't drink any water is that they stopped it at 3 days, because that's when you start getting sick. Now you're talking about life and death, right? Yeah. So they had them go into this functional MRI, which tests. It's an MRI of the brain that's testing how the brain is functioning.
Right.
And actually, I'll start with the group that hadn't eaten for 5 days. So the group that had not eaten for 5 days were put in this functional MRI. They were asked to talk about their favorite foods. Their favorite foods were brought in to the MRI place, and they could smell it.
Yeah.
And in fact, they let them put it on their tongue and test it, but they had to spit it out. And what they did is they studied the area on the brain that lit up, which indicated cravings, right? And we're gonna say just relative to the other ones, we're gonna say it's baseball size, okay? The area that lit up. Okay. Then they had the people that had not drank water for 3 days, and they had them talk about waterfalls. They would drip water on their feet. They would do this, and then they noticed that comparatively, the area that lit up was basketball size. So baseball size, basketball size, right? And then they had people that had been addicted to opioids before, and they wanted them to talk about their first use, the very first use. And then they checked what area lit up. And if you compare the baseball, the basketball, the area that lit up in their brain was baseball field size.
That's nuts.
And they didn't notice any improvement at all until about those who had been drug-free for over 2 years.
Wow.
So what do people do when they're starving or when they are dehydrated?
Yeah.
They start acting different, right? If you've ever heard about natural disasters, people will start stealing. They'll start breaking down windows and going in and getting food. They're in survival mode. So there's all this behavior that a human will do. And who's going to blame them? Who's going to say, oh, you got to punish that person because they hadn't drank in 3 days and they broke down a window and stole some water out of a business? No one's going to blame them. But their desire comparatively is nothing compared to someone in addiction. Their desire is so intense, and they're just craving it so bad. But yet, we blame them for bad behavior, you know, for poor judgment, for not having a willpower. Like, I don't have a willpower to not eat for 5 days and then not eat the food that's in front of me, you know? And so how are they going to say no for forever?
Yeah. No, that's a fascinating study, and I appreciate that. I mean, to capture what's really going on here, because that will give us insight into understanding, you know, how we actually get through this. And I think listening to this, it makes me think, you definitely do not want to start doing this, because what you're talking about is like lifelong potentially impacts of this. So just on the prevention side,
yes,
if you're hearing this and you haven't done it, like, you can now tell this is serious. And so thanks, Mercedes, for sharing this. Anything else that you think we missed in terms of what fentanyl does to the brain, how both medical detox and medically assisted treatment can help that?
Yeah, I want to encourage, if you're struggling with an addiction, or if you have a family member, the person you're seeing either in yourself or someone else, that is not who they are. This is not who you are. There is help. And I have seen people in long-term recovery, and they become the pillars of their home. They go back to school. They're the ones that are now the counselors. We have professionals who are now business owners. We have people who are incredible parents because they finally get to be who they are, because they're not trying to survive. Yeah. And it's beautiful to see that. And anyone can get help. Anyone can get help. You don't have to live in this. Your family member doesn't have to live in this. So I want you to have hope that, yes, there are biochemical changes, but science has advanced. We have the way to help that, plus the recovery services for those habits, to deal with those habits. People can be incredible people, and maybe someone that you just don't trust and say, I can never trust that family member. You should see what they would look like when they're in recovery. It's so beautiful.
Awesome. That's a good high note to leave this message on. Thanks so much for sharing this and for the work you're doing in the community.
I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you.